Who knows what Jay-Z, J.K. Rowling, Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey all have in common? Okay, I will tell you then. They have all overcome failure in one shape or form to go on to gain success in their respective careers. Welcome to My Perfect Failure. Join us as we delve into the world of our perfect failures. We will interview, explore, and discuss how our perfect failures can lead us to success. Join us and tune in.
Welcome everybody to another episode of My Perfect Failure. Today I'm super excited because I have an amazing guest for you. So my guest today is the visionary behind BookThinkers, a dynamic enterprise dedicated to forging meaningful connections between authors and readers within the realm of personal development. The BookThinkers ecosystem encompasses an engaging Instagram community, an enlightened podcast titled BookThinkers also, life-changing books, innovative mobile applications, and so much more. In his words, we're passionate about uniting individuals with the transformative power of books and social media, and has proven to be an invaluable tool in fulfilling that mission. At BookThinkers, the pursuit of knowledge never ceases. He and his team are tirelessly committed to introducing their audience to fresh literary treasures, new mentors, and invaluable resources. If you're eager to explore the art of extracting the utmost wisdom from personal development literature, discover the hallmark traits of exceptional books, and glean invaluable advice for authors striving to expand their reach, then sit back and enjoy this episode. So a very warm welcome to My Perfect Failure, Nick Hutchison. How are you, Nick?
Oh man, I'm excited for the conversation today. And like I said before we press record, I'm an open book.
Yeah.
And the pun is intended.
Yeah, I love that.
I'm excited to see what you want to chat about today.
I love that. So I was super excited when we connected because books is obviously a fascinating, it's a wonderful topic. I love what you're doing with your Instagram account. Your Instagram account is so vibrant. I will put that on the show notes. I implore everybody to subscribe, follow, because you see immediately your passion for books. There's a lovely kind of blend of books that you cover. You give us lovely insights into that book, what we can get from that book, and it's a beautiful Instagram channel you've got. So I'm eager to tap into how that came about, and obviously I'm really keen to talk about your book. But before we get going, I guess where I was keen to start, the obvious place for me is books for you. Where did it all start?
Yeah, well, I was not much of a reader growing up, which might surprise anybody that can see this background that I have right now of like over 1,000 books.
Wow.
But yeah, I was more of the athlete. I played football, I wrestled, I played basketball. I loved sports growing up.
Okay.
And that continued into college. I still was not much of an academic. I was more of an athlete, but I took an internship going into my senior year of college, or as you might say, university. Going into my senior year, it was a local software company. It was a sales internship. And my boss at the time, he introduced me to the world of podcasting. He said, "Hey, Nick, like you've got an hour commute each way to this internship every day of the week. Listening to the same song, it's not going to change your life. The same song for the 5,000th time, right?
Yeah.
But listening to a personal development podcast might. So check out some of these shows." And so I started to listen to these podcasts. And what I realized was that so many of the people that I wanted to be like, they were giving at least some credit for their success to the books that they had read.
Yeah.
And so I kind of just had this moment. I could probably describe it better now than I could back then, but I just had this moment where I realized that if I deliberately choose not to read these books, then I'm deliberately choosing to live under my potential. And so I decided to embrace that. I decided to go to my local bookstore and get a bunch of the books that I'd heard about on these podcasts and start reading. So that's kind of how it happened. And I think I was about 20 years old.
Okay, lovely. So when that happened, were you all in? Did it take a minute to kind of get to the flow and maybe want to do it?
I think I was very fortunate that the first book that I decided to read was a great book. It was Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
Say, can I just pause you for a second? What book do you think I've just completed yesterday?
Was it Rich Dad Poor Dad?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's funny. That's funny. Well, for me at the time, the reason that I think it was the perfect book for me and the reason that I went all in after reading it was because Robert says in the beginning of that book that the subject of money is not taught at school, right? So we're not all on an even playing field. The subject of money is taught at home. So if you grow up in a poor or middle-class family, you're going to learn poor or middle-class money habits. If you want to learn rich money habits, you have to learn from a rich person like Robert Kiyosaki. And as I'm going through this book about employee versus business owner versus investor and putting money to work for you and all of these things, I'm just having aha moment after aha moment. I'm underlining everything. I'm circling everything. I'm texting quotes to my friends. Like, it was very exciting to me because I had never learned about any of these subjects before. And I was a business student at the time who didn't know anything about money. So every time these subjects would come up in the classroom or other kids were talking about these big jobs and all the money they were going to make in these big investment funds and stuff, I'm like, I don't even know what that means. So Rich Dad Poor Dad was an introduction into that for me. And after a couple more books, I was leading those conversations about money. So I just kind of had this moment, like, if I can undo all of these insecurities and gain all of this confidence after just a couple of books, what other areas of my life can I apply this to? And so, I was all in, but it was because it was the right book at the right time for me.
Okay. So just looking at the books behind you, you can't help but notice there's an avalanche of books behind you. So at some point it became insatiable. I don't know whether you said it. Sorry, forgive me. I don't know whether you said it or whether I listened to it on a post. You read an incredible amount of books per year.
Yeah, I read about 100 books per year.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I've read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books since I started my journey, which started about 10 years ago. And I think when I started, maybe it was like 20 or 30 books a year, and then it was like 30 or 40 books a year, 40 or 50 books a year. Now it's like 100 books a year.
Okay, that's incredible. So my intriguing thought is, do you have a particular place that you read your books? Do you have a particular time of day that you read books, or does it really whenever the moment arises and you can find time?
Yeah, it's a little bit of all of that, but I'll say this. My favorite time to read is when I have the most energy, because that's when it's most important to me. An issue that a lot of people have is they're like, oh, every time I start reading a book, I fall asleep. Well, that's probably because you're reading at the end of a work day. Right? After watching TV, you're getting ready to go to bed. You have the least amount of energy, and now you try to open up a book. It's not going to do anything for you. So here's my routine in the morning. I wake up in the morning. Within 5 minutes, I'm outside walking my dog with my wife. We're getting some early sunlight, the vitamin D. We're increasing our energy. We're getting some exercise endorphins. Then I go back home. I do a 20-minute meditation as she gets ready for the gym. Then we both go to the gym together. We exercise a little bit. And then when I come home and shower, I have my first cup of coffee, right? A little bit of caffeine. So now I have all of these exercise endorphins in me, like this extra energy. I have this caffeine, which is a cognitive enhancer, and it's really early in my day still. So I have a ton of energy. That's the best time for me to read because I have the most energy. I've heard it said this way before. Even if you drink the world's best cup of coffee, if you're in a bitter mood, the coffee will taste bitter as well. And so I just try to make sure that when I read, I'm in the best headspace possible.
That's really good advice. I love that thing about energy because I'm one of those people that sometimes fall foul of trying to read at the end of the day. And sometimes I can be quite excited about whatever I'm going to read. And then I'm about 2 or 3 pages in and I realize I'm struggling. I can't keep my eyes open. My brain had never computed Paul, think about when I've got more energy. So
Yeah,
thank you
well,
for that.
you are the exact type of person that I'm looking to help with this book, because I have dozens of recommendations just like that one.
Right,
And
okay.
yeah, it's common knowledge, right? If you want to read a good book and it's very important to you, make sure you do it when you have the most energy. But unless somebody articulates it to you, like I'm sure somebody said that to me at some point during my journey, then it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So you mentioned your book. I definitely want to get into that. So I love the title, by the way, Rise of the Reader. And so my first question is, what does the title mean to you?
Well, Rise has a lot of action to it. So it's
Yeah,
like, let's rise together.
yeah,
Let's bring more attention back to reading good books
mm,
and then using them to improve our lives. Rise, like it's an act
yeah,
of progress. It's an act of momentum. It's an act of elevation and euphoria. Like
mm,
that's why I decided to call it that. And, I wanted to get a little fun with it and make an acronym for Rise, which I didn't end up doing. But the one that I thought of was read,
yeah,
implement, shift your mindset, and then
mm,
expand your life. So
yeah,
RISE. But Rise of the Reader is just an opportunity for you to feel like books have momentum and feeling, like an elevation
yeah,
to them. They're not just a dull piece of paper. You know what I mean?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And have so being such an avid reader of books, what was the process like for you creating Rise of the Reader? What was that like?
Oh, it was really tough. So my marketing agency works with a couple hundred authors a year. And
Yeah,
I thought, okay, yeah, I know writing a book is a hard task,
mm,
but I thought I could do it pretty easily, right? I'm very disciplined. I can
yeah,
follow routine. I have a lot of willpower. I'm kind of creative, like with all the content. So I'm like, I could write a book. No, 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 no. I was totally wrong. It took me about 3 years to get the book done. It is, I have so much more respect for the people that I work with. It's a tough process. The reason that I decided to write the book is because as I was growing my BookThinkers community, right? You
yeah,
said you were scrolling through the Instagram today. We have about 150,000
yeah,
followers.
big, yeah,
It does
big,
about 1 million impressions a month. And, but over time, tons and tons of people are reaching out to me and they're saying, hey, Nick, I appreciate all of the recommendations, but
mm,
how the heck do I take action on everything that you're teaching me?
yeah,
And I was realizing that I was able to do it. Like I can read these books and then I can integrate them directly into my life and I can see the results almost immediately. But like, what's missing for other people? Why can't they do it? So I realized that even though I was responding to people, like I would answer a voice note, I would get on a quick
mm,
Zoom call, I'd type out an email, but I felt like I was underserving those people because I was doing more than I was capable of articulating.
yeah,
And so I kind of had to like step back and almost observe myself from a third party perspective. And I had to analyze my own behavior. Like, what the heck is Nick Hutchison doing to get more out of these books?
yeah,
And as I started to observe my behavior, I ended up finding, a lot of strategies and naming them and building
yeah,
roadmaps and plans and stuff for other people.
yeah. And so one of the things that particularly excited me about getting to meet you and discuss your book and the tips and tricks that we can all employ to get the maximum out of reading was exactly what you said. So when I read a book, sometimes there's this feeling of, can't think of the right word, a slight, it's not an underwhelming feeling. It's like, why can't I retain more of what I've read? Obviously, not going to be able to retain everything, but sometimes I'm not that disciplined at highlighting and so forth. So anything, obviously, your book is a book that I will be getting, but it's the opportunity to understand how I can start developing tactics and tricks where I can read and actually extract more information, particularly when I'm reading books that potentially are maybe more self-development orientated.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Here's where it starts for me. And
Mm,
by the way, this is related to retention, and we'll get there in a second, but here's where it starts for me. Sometimes I'll meet people and I'd say, hey, Paul, what book are you reading? And you'd tell me. And then I'd say, why? And you'd be like, What do you mean, why? Well, why are you reading the book that you're reading? I think that's the place that we want to start. We need to set an intention for each book. So here's one that I'm reading right now, and we'll walk through this process together. This book is called Afraid. The subtitle is Understanding the Purpose of Fear and Harnessing the Power of Anxiety. I'm not just going to jump in and start reading this book. I'm going to start thinking about what's my intention for this book? What's the desired outcome? And does it fit the SMART goal framework? So a SMART goal, S stands for specific. Your goal needs to be specific. M stands for measurable. Your goal needs to be measurable. Do you know whether or not you achieved what the book is set out to do for you? A stands for attainable. Setting a realistic goal, something that you know you can achieve, not something unrealistic. R stands for relevant. Is it relevant to your life? And is it written down? WR, is it written down? And then the T is time bound. You want to give yourself a deadline for implementing whatever your goal is.
Yeah.
And then I write that intention on the inside cover of each book that I read.
Okay. All right.
So check this out. Find and implement. Here, I'll read it to you. Find and implement at least 2 strategies for managing fear by the end of September. Because, now I'm going to juice it up a little bit, because fear still holds me back and I want to be the boldest version of myself. So here's the thing. Each time I read this book, I'm going to review that intention so that my brain can filter for those 2 strategies that I can implement. That's how I start to take more action and retain more. You want to get some emotion in there. You want to define your goal with as much specificity. There we go. You want to define your goal with as much specificity as you can so that you're more likely to take action on a small number of things instead of just sitting back and absorbing everything that you can.
Okay, I love so that I love, and I would never in a million years thought of that. So that makes it a very intentional experience, because you get the book and I've got one more thought coming to my head. So hypothetically, I go to the bookstore to get the book. Do you set the goals for that specific book when you do you know the goals that you have in mind when you go into the store to purchase the book, or do you start to look at the book and then you see these goals, or you make up the goals then and there?
It could be either one.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. So what I like to recommend for people who are just starting their reading journey, I like to say books are great at solving problems and developing skills. So which bucket do you fall into? Is there a problem that you want to solve, or is there a skill that you want to develop? Let's just say there's a problem I want to solve, which is fear in this example with this book. Okay, so what's the issue? Well, each time I'm presented with a situation where I feel fear, I end up running away, and instead I want to learn how to run at the fear, right? So I start thinking about that problem and I start thinking about what I want to solve. Then I go out and find a good book that can help me solve that problem.
Okay, all right, yeah.
Or develop a skill set. But the other thing is, let's say a friend or a family member gives you a book, or maybe you just picked up Rich Dad, Poor Dad because it sold 40 million copies and you want to see what all the hype is about. Read the cover, read the back cover, maybe read a little bit about the author online, maybe read the introduction, and then you can decide, what do I want to get out of this book? Is it related to any problems I'm currently facing? Or can it help me develop a specific skill set that maybe I could improve? And so then I'd start to develop the intention there.
Yeah. So when you, because you mentioned you read 100 books a year. What is the process that you go by to actually to read 100? I guess what I mean by that, are some of those books written down, so that these are books you're going to read this year? So you might have, say, 50 that these are sort of the books that definitely I want to read, and then maybe there might be some ones that come into play because actually I've got a new goal. I need to find a book that could help me achieve this goal. What does that look like?
Well, I will admit that I get paid to read a lot of books and review them for my community.
Even better.
Yes. And I I work with a lot of authors to help them amplify their message behind the scenes. That's what my agency does.
Yeah.
So I end up working with people, through, like, I'm probably going to end up working with people in November and December that I haven't even met yet.
Yeah.
And so their book isn't on my radar, but I'm going to
Yeah.
end up reading it because we're going to go book them on podcasts or help them with video content. But I'll say, let's pretend that I didn't work in the book industry. I would start with a handful of books that I want to read in the beginning of the year. And then as new opportunities present themselves to solve problems or to develop skills, because life changes so fast, my list would always be changing too.
Yeah.
But here's some math that I think your audience would find really interesting, and you probably will as well, Paul. Check this out. Sometimes people tell me that they can't find time to read.
Yeah.
And I always like to say, you're not going to create more time. So let's replace low impact activities, things that are generally meaningless in the long term, like scrolling on Instagram in the morning and watching Netflix in the evening. Let's replace 15 minutes of Instagram or TikTok or whatever in the morning and 15 minutes of Netflix or HBO or whatever else in the evening. Not the whole activity. I'm not a robot, but just 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening. For a beginning reader, in 15 minutes, you might be able to read 10 pages. Okay, so that's 10 pages in the morning, 10 pages in the evening, 5 days a week. That's 100 pages.
Yeah.
Most of these books are only 200 pages long these days. So 100 pages a week is a new book every 2 weeks. That's 26 books a year by replacing a little bit of Instagram and a little bit of Netflix with something slightly more, constructive. And listen, your future self, like the version of you in the future, 5 years, 10 years from now, will be looking back saying, thank you so much. Because when I think about this, like, I can't even remember the main characters in Netflix shows that I watched 6 months ago. Like, that's totally meaningless for my life. But the books, Rich Dad Poor Dad, I read 10 years ago and I can quote from it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing about reading as well, it just opens up the mind. It makes us more worldly knowledgeable. I think it makes us more curious. And I think it sort of pushes ambition and ideas, and it just takes us to places that potentially we didn't even know were possible or viable.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that's why I particularly love what you're doing. So people that just don't read, what are they missing out on? Because obviously there's, some people will read lots and lots like you. There'll be some people that will maybe read 100 pages a week, but then there's obviously I guess a group, I don't know what percentage, that maybe reading it they're totally lost to that. What would your sort of advice be to people that may have sort of missed that sort of reading opportunity?
Yeah, I feel for those people because they don't know what they're missing out on. I think a lot about mortality, right? The subject of death. I think a lot about that because I read a book a couple of years ago called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie Ware. Have you heard of it?
I'm gonna. It's probably safer to say I haven't.
It's a really good book. So this woman, she was a palliative care nurse, which means that she would spend the last couple of months, maybe the last couple of weeks or days with somebody as they were dying. And she'd spend a lot of time talking to these people. And what she realized over time was that most people die with a lot of regret, which is really sad.
Yeah.
And they only realize they have this regret when they're at the end of their lives and they realize they don't have any time to undo everything that they wish they had done before. So she writes this book, and the number one regret is that people live a life based on other people's expectations of them instead of their own, right? They work a job they dislike because their parents wanted them to work in it, or they end up with a partner that they don't necessarily get along with, or whatever the case may be. And so I read this book and I started to think a lot about regret. Then I got into the subject of Stoicism. It's this ancient philosophy. One of the concepts is memento mori, remember you're going to die. And so to me, you could be scared of that, or you could embrace that and live your life to the fullest, take advantage of each and every day, and make sure that you don't end up living a life full of regret. Okay, so that's the kind of the first part of my answer. You don't want to regret the life that you've lived. And when you read about all of these successful people, it's going to inspire you to be bigger, bolder, take more action, be of more service to other people. That will naturally happen.
Yeah.
And so, for me, these books, they condense decades of somebody else's lived experience into days of reading.
Yeah.
And so, I kind of joke around. I say, I'm 29 years old, but if you incorporate all of the books behind me, I'm thousands and thousands of years old.
Yeah.
And so for people that don't read, I also love to ask them this question. They say, I can't read. I don't have time. No way that I can read. I'm not good at reading. I'll say, if I paid you $10,000 to read a book by the end of next week, do you think you could do it? And they'll kind of laugh and be like, I could read 5,
Yeah.
So it's not a question of whether or not you can read. It's whether or not you value it enough. And I'll wrap up my long kind of ramble here by saying that so many of us think the pain that we're experiencing is permanent and that it's unique to us. But the fact is, 100 billion people have lived before us. Millions of them have written books, and thousands of those books probably detail how to overcome whatever the pain is that you're currently experiencing. Yeah. And so you just need to take the time to find the right book, purchase it, and spend a few hours reading and implementing it. And you can remove something that may have been plaguing you for years just by reading a book. That's why we read these books.
No, I totally agree. It just totally opens up just opportunity, hope, and it can do so much for us. And I always this is a bit of a selfish podcast for me, because a lot of what you're saying are tools and tricks that I want. So I'm sort of
good. I know I'm helping one person.
Yeah, well, you're helping all of us, but but I'm glad. That's why I was excited to connect with you, because I love what you're doing. Very much interested in that. Actually, this is an intrigue question. So I was curious around, is there a book that you've gifted more than any other?
That changes every year, but the book that I've gifted the most recently has been Die with Zero by Bill Perkins.
Okay, don't know that.
And Die with Zero, again, is kind of this idea that you want to live the best life that you can. You want to enjoy the passage of time. You don't want to delay gratification. Here's this thing that happens to most people, unfortunately. In the UK and in the United States, we're probably the two worst at this. You delay your gratification, but in a bad way. You live a life that you don't really enjoy. You work a 9-to-5 job. You hustle too much. You sacrifice your health and your relationships for money. And then you get to your retirement age, call it 65. Now I'm retired. Now I can start traveling the world. But what happens is you realize at that age, it's very difficult to travel the world full time, changing time zones, new diets, all of these crazy experiences like hiking Machu Picchu. They're much more difficult when you're 65 or 70 or 75 years old. So do them when you're in the best shape. Just like you want to read when you have the most energy, you want to experience the world when you can get the most out of that experience, which is now. And so that whole book, Die with Zero, is all about experiential living, getting the most out of every moment, doing what truly fulfills you. And it's a really good kind of perspective shift. It's a really good book, Die with Zero.
I've written that down. I'm going to put that in I keep a little spreadsheet of books to get. So I'm going to put that, that's going in there after this. So I was just thinking about where we started with this conversation about how you got into reading. Like I think your work colleague suggested that you should, on your journey, that you should maybe read and sort of expand, your mind a little bit more. He must be totally blown away by what you're doing now.
Yeah. And you know what? I haven't worked with him in a number of years, but I just saw him at a wedding a few months ago. And I was trying to give him all this credit. I'm like, dude, I have this big business. I'm reading all these books. I'm meeting all these crazy people like on my podcast and stuff, like these business celebrities. And And it's all because you encouraged me to listen to podcasts. And he's like, dude, I don't get any credit. That was all you. I barely even encouraged you to do it. And I'm like, yeah, but you did.
Yeah.
And that little shift, that little suggestion made a completely different life for me. And if he hadn't done that, I wouldn't have stumbled into it and I wouldn't be living the life I am today. So yeah, I owe a lot to him. His name's Kyle. And I wrote about him a little bit in my book too, just to say thank you.
Yeah. And you think about the domino effect of that. So that little sort of piece of encouragement has led you to do what you're doing, and you're obviously reaping awards. You've read all these books and you've created this amazing business, but also you've connected with all, you've got a massive Instagram following. You've got people that you're providing these insights to, but they're going away, they're getting books, they're reading books, and they're taking action. So there's this incredible domino effect that's continuous.
Yeah, absolutely. And think about this too. And this is something I try to be conscious of. Like, every time you meet somebody new, give them a smile, wave, say hi, ask them how they're doing, right? Because you never know, that could end up shifting the trajectory of their life. So imagine somebody in your audience today here's something that I say. Maybe it's a book recommendation or a strategy for reading, or it encourages them to pick up their first book. And then 20 years from now, they're positively impacting the lives of somebody else.
Yeah.
That will be amazing. But none of that whole chain, including this conversation, would have happened if he didn't say, hey, dude, I think you're capable of more. Like, stop listening to the same music and check out some podcasts. That was it, and now somebody else 10 years from now is going to get a book recommendation because of somebody on this podcast. And it's just, it's this beautiful butterfly effect.
Yeah. Yeah. And just going back, so the business empire, that's growing and growing and growing and growing. I watched one of your podcasts earlier with, I think it was with Eleanor Cardone, which was very inspiring. And obviously you've got your agency, so you've morphed a whole bunch of things off the back of your reading sort of journey. How did all that come about?
Well, as I started sharing the books that I was reading on social media, right, because they're having such a big impact on me, that audience just started to grow over time. And there were a few failed, attempts at monetizing that audience. I tried to build a mobile app that crashed and burned and never really came into existence, and some other things that didn't work. But as I continued to build my community, authors started to reach out to me and they'd say, hey, Nick, my target reader for the book looks a lot like your audience. Can I pay you for a book review? And I said, yeah, right. Like, I'm reading for free. Now I'm getting paid to read. That's pretty cool. And I would end every one of those engagements by asking these authors, hey, is there anything else that I could help with related to book PR, book marketing, podcasting? Like, I just want to learn and grow and expand and try things out. And that's how I built the business. Just one small interaction at a time, trying out all these different services, while working a full-time job. And eventually BookThinkers, became my full-time job.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful what you're doing. And the guests that you have on your podcast are amazing. And sort of the information you extract from them is amazing. So it's fantastic to see you evolve and what you're doing evolve. So for people that are listening that are saying, Paul, please can you ask Nick, where can we get the book? Where can they get the book?
Sure. I think it's available in all of the major online retailers, including tons of ones in Europe that I'm not entirely familiar with, but Amazon.com, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, there's a ton of them. And you can always go to my website, nickhutch.com, NICKHUTCH.com, or BookThinkers.com. And there will be links to the book there as well.
And what I can do, I can obviously liaise with your team and get all the relevant links, put them on the show notes. So it's pretty much, it's very easy for people to get the book. Earlier you mentioned Stoicism, and prior to me actually meeting you, I was thinking, I don't know whether you've had a conversation with him, but I think it would be one that I would love to listen to, you and Ryan Holiday. Have you guys had an interview or spoken?
Yes, he's been on my podcast before.
Okay,
he's great.
To listen to that. I will be listening to that. I should have listened to that before this one. Yeah, I thought, so I know that He's obviously, like you, he's a big reader. I've just got another question around. There's a term that I think you referenced this active reading.
Active reading?
Yeah, yeah. Is that
Yeah, I just
sorry?
go ahead.
They do carry on.
No, I think to me, that's just reading with intention. You know, it's reading in order to take action. It's not just passively sitting back and reading these books, hoping that they're going to change your life.
Yeah, yeah. I think totally, totally. And that's where I think sometimes we can get lost. Also had a question around. So do you ever, maybe not for a client, but do you ever get a book and you think, well, this is not doing it for me, and then would you just leave a book if it's not hitting a spot?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And listen, we've returned books that we've been paid to review before too, because not everything's a good fit. And I want to make sure that I only promote high quality books. So Tim Ferriss and Ryan Holiday had a podcast once where they talked about this same subject. And I love Ryan's recommendation. He says it's called the rule of 100.
Okay.
Take the number 100 and subtract your age.
Okay.
That's how many pages you have to read before before you can decide whether or not it's going to be a good fit for you. And so what happens is the older you get, the less you have to read because the wiser you've become.
Yeah. Okay.
And go ahead.
No, I'm laughing. Because I like it.
Yeah. So like right now I'm 29, I'd have to read 71 pages, but when I turn 30, I only have to read 70. And I think that it is valuable to give a book a try, because you never know. You're always 3 feet from gold, right? You're always 1 or 2 pages away from that thing that could change your life. And there have probably been times where I wanted to give up on a book. And then I thought, you know what, let me just read a few more pages. And then I find something super valuable in there. So yeah, I always like to think about it like that.
When you read books as well, because it's like watching a film. If I read a book for a second and third time, there's always things that I miss that I thought, or maybe I forgot. I'm not sure which one it is. So, do you reread books?
Oh yeah, I've probably read Rich Dad Poor Dad 10 times since my first reading. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. And
yeah, and by the way, I think it's a Buddhist saying, but it's like you'll never step in the same river twice. Yeah. And the idea is that the river has changed. Like the actual water itself has, it's gone and it's been replaced with new water, but you've also changed. Yeah. And so same thing with the book. I mean, each time I reread a book, unless it's back to back, which doesn't really happen very often, but let's say a couple years have gone by, I'm a completely different person. Yeah. So when I read the book, I may see things from a completely different perspective.
That's so true. That's so, because we do evolve, don't we?
Yeah.
And so going back to your book, are you excited? Silly question, really, but are you excited about the book getting out there, people reading the book, and how it's going to impact people? And obviously, you can't be privy to everything, but I love the mystique of putting a book out there, people taking the lessons, taking the tips, and doing stuff with. You must be incredibly excited about that.
I am. Yeah, I am. And you said silly questions, so I was almost going to be like, no, I'm not excited, just to kind of change up my answer. But no, I'm really excited. There's a little bit of fear, right? Like I hope people like this type of thing. But I know that every time I'm interviewed on a podcast like this and somebody like you tells me, oh, that's exactly what I needed to hear, or I've never thought about it like that, I'm like, most people don't. So I know that what I have to say is new and different and useful and actionable. And that's what I care the most about.
Yeah. You know what I really like? I've obviously liked everything, but I particularly like the intentional element of actually setting that intent at the outset. So I know what my agenda is for this book. And it steers me. It's almost like a sat nav. I know where I'm going with this book. I know what areas of focus, because I always have this sense of disappointment that I might enjoy the book, but I've not retained enough, and it's because I don't really have that much structure or intention at the outset. So that's it. So for me, that's a huge takeaway.
Yeah, when I think about retention, and I'm just realizing this for the first time. I write actually about some retention strategies, so some
Okay, yeah,
formats for note taking and storage and like a review system to improve retention. But if you implement something into your life and it becomes a part of you, you're also far more likely to retain it,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so by taking better action and being intentional with why you're reading the book, you'll naturally retain more that way too.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm so honored to have you on the podcast. I'm so honored that we're just a little tinsy wincy part of the journey, and seeing your wonderful book out there for the masses to read and enjoy. As we're getting towards the end, I was keen to ask you, so where is the best place for people to find you, to follow you, to find out more about you and what your team are doing?
Yeah, I think on Instagram at BookThinkers, that's our biggest community, our most vibrant community. Like you said, you went through some of the content earlier. Get in the comment section,
Yeah,
meet some people. And then here's the other thing that I'll throw out there for everybody that's listening or watching today. If you want a personalized book recommendation from me, DM me at BookThinkers. I answer
oh
every
wow,
message. Sometimes it takes me a little bit to respond because there's
yeah,
a lot of messages, but tell me about a problem that you're currently experiencing, or tell me about a skill that you'd like to develop, and I'll provide a recommendation. And I'll even try to follow up with you in a few months
oh
to
wow,
see
that's
if you've
amazing.
if you've read it. Yeah, I have a whole little spreadsheet thing too.
Well, that is amazing because I know that you're super busy with everything you're going on. So that's an incredibly generous offer. There's a question that I forgot to ask you. So in the morning when you read your books, are you are you reading a certain type of book? So I'm thinking about positive uplifting stuff in the morning.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of the books that I'm reading are I view them through the lens of positive and constructive. Like even if something like this book about fear,
Yeah.
I'm reading about it through the lens of how can I create something positive, from fear. And so yeah, I'm always reading something that
Okay.
at least
Okay.
I
Yeah.
view it as positive.
All right. Love that. So you almost reframe, even if it is like fear, you frame that so there's a positive aspect to it.
Yes.
Okay, okay. I'm conscious of your time. So we just have one last question, which is the recurring question. So if you could invite three inspirational people for dinner, they could be alive or past. Who would you invite?
I would invite my mom, number
Okay,
one,
great.
because she asks great questions.
Yes, yeah,
And she loves to learn from all of these books and from my podcast interviews and other places. And she just asks great questions.
yeah,
Number two, I would invite Jesus Christ.
yeah,
A lot of questions there. Grew up in a Catholic household and went to church, still go to church as much as I can. And I think that he's one of very many spiritual teachers that could probably answer a lot of really interesting questions. And then number three, I was thinking about this one a little bit, Tim Ferriss, maybe because he's one of
yeah,
my favorite authors. I'm really into biohacking right now. So I like this guy, Andrew Huberman. I have a lot of questions for him.
yeah,
But I think the third one would be Joe Rogan. So
yeah,
Joe Rogan, big time podcaster. He also asks really interesting
yeah,
questions, and he's not afraid to ask controversial questions
yeah,
or interview people that he doesn't agree with. So Joe Rogan is somebody who's not actually religious at all and thinks a lot of like this
yeah,
whole,
yeah,
Christianity, Jesus Christ thing is just, to him it's kind of a joke. So I'd love to watch that interaction and
yeah,
just see, but he's open, right? He likes diverse
yeah.
perspectives. So those are three of the people that I'd like to sit down and talk with.
Okay, that sounds like a wonderful dinner to me. Nick,
Yeah.
it's been pure delight to meet you and learn from you. I'm excited to read the book, and I'm excited to see what you're going to be doing in the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years as you grow and grow. So thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, appreciate you, Paul. You asked great questions, and I'm happy that I could be of value to you today as well.
Huge value, huge value. I'm going to be telling my friends about your book and also about some of the little hacks that they can start putting into their reading. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
thank you everybody for tuning into this episode of My Perfect Failure. We're always looking to grow the show. So please do share this episode far and wide, particularly if you know people that are looking to improve their reading skills and ability and really gain more from their reading experience. And your feedback is most welcome. So we're keen to hear about the things you like and equally the things you don't like. So you can find me at paul@myperfectfailure.com, or you can find me via the contact page on the website. So take care for now. Bye.
Thanks for listening to My Perfect Failure podcast. Be sure to visit www.myperfectfailure.com to join the conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Google Play. Look out for our next episode.